Hey, we are back, and I think we're back on Restream. So in theory, this should work. We'll see. But who knows? So we had slated for today mindfulness and is this phenomenology? I guess we could still do that. I was kind of thinking about talking about panpsychism. So maybe we'll get to mindfulness and phenomenology afterwards, where we maybe we can listen to some like Sam Harris. So I got here via Sam Harris video where he was talking with his wife Annika. So we'll go full circle. I did this discussion a long time ago, so I actually don't even remember what's in it. But that's no worries. We could still run this now. I kind of like doing the side here. Maybe I gotta stop that from happening. All right. So, panpsychism. This is a conversation I had a while back. I don't remember what the contents of this conversation are, but I remember it being interesting, and so I kept it. And I think I'm just going to read through it now and maybe hold off on commentary until we get to the bottom. But we'll see, because in theory, I kind of provide commentary when I give responses. So, are you familiar with Annika Harris's case that consciousness could be fundamental? Yes, I'm familiar with Annika Harris's case that consciousness could be fundamental. She explores this idea extensively in her book, Conscious, A Brief Guide to the Fundamental Mystery of the Mind, and in various articles and discussions. Harris's perspective often delves into the hard problem of consciousness, a term coined by philosopher David Chalmers, which refers to the difficulty of explaining how physical processes in the brain give rise to subjective experience, the qualitative feeling of what it's like to be. Her case for consciousness as potentially fundamental can be summarized by several key points: the inadequacy of emergence. While the dominant scientific view is that consciousness emerges from complex computations in the brain, Harris questions whether this fully accounts for subjective experience. She suggests that simply increasing complexity in a system doesn't automatically explain why or how it would light up with awareness. Right. I don't think that increasing complexity as like the sole argument would be comprehensive enough or sufficiently comprehensive to make that type of case. And we do point out something similar in part one. So actually this is it's good that we're having this discussion now, where certainly there's a correlation between brain activity and our subjective feelings. So we know that there is a strong connection there. There's still this hard problem of consciousness, this gap that we still can't make sense of. Like, why does this actually result in our subjective experience? And then you could think about that in both ways, or in two ways. You could think about it in the simple way of how do the like biological processes result in that, and then you could also think about it in the evolutionary sense, like how would evolution end up with this biological result of our current brains? How does the neocortex result in this type of thing? And or this is a similar discussion as to what we spoke about recently, where how much of our consciousness could we ascribe to, cortical additions. So Panpsychism as a possibility. Harris is open to and explores the idea of panpsychism, the view that consciousness or some proto-conscious properties might be a fundamental feature of reality present in some form, even at a very basic level of existence, not just in complex biological organisms. This doesn't necessarily mean that electrons or rocks have rich inner lives like humans, but that the stuff of consciousness might be more widespread than commonly assumed. Okay, so this is a very odd thing to stomach. Let's continue. Challenging intuitions. She encourages a critical examination of our common intuitions about consciousness, self, and free will. Harris points to neuroscientific findings, such as those from split brain patients or the timing of conscious awareness of decisions, to suggest that our everyday understanding of our own minds might be misleading. This is a fair point, but it's also a point that you could make separate from panpsychism. The limits of current science. Harris highlights that while neuroscience has made significant strides in understanding the correlates of consciousness, in other words, which brain activities are associated with conscious experiences, it hasn't yet explained how or why those physical activities generate subjective feeling itself. So this is the gap that we were just talking about. This explanatory gap leaves room for alternative hypotheses, including the idea that consciousness is a fundamental aspect of the universe, much like space, time, or mass. In essence, Annika Harris argues for a more open-minded and rigorous exploration of the nature of consciousness, suggesting that dismissing the possibility of it being a fundamental aspect of reality may be premature, given the profound mystery that still surrounds it. She advocates for considering a wider range of philosophical and scientific perspectives to tackle this enduring question. So what do I say? I say I don't quite understand how the inadequacy of emergence idea is comprehensive. The inadequacy of emergence. This is she suggests that simply increasing complexity in a system does. Okay, yeah, right. Okay, so I'm kind of touching on that. This is kind of exactly what I just said. While certainty. Okay, let me restart. I don't quite understand how the inadequacy of emergence idea is comprehensive. While certainly complexity doesn't always mean consciousness, and looking at externalities of a system doesn't always mean consciousness, certainly AI will be able to mirror human behavior. The strongest argument I understand is that there are processes in the brain, which includes our entire body, that affect our consciousness, the only consciousness that we can be sufficiently certain about. We can identify behavior of the system to determine which parts of the brain have certain responsibilities, roughly speaking. And we can then use this information to speculate as to whether other animals are conscious. Although we need to be careful about this word since we intuit it with our own experience, whereas other animals don't have a developed neocortex and thus would have a different experience. We can see how ants wouldn't have anything similar to our experience, whereas cows probably share certain aspects of our experience. As I said, we are speculating here with reasons. I also don't quite understand the definition of fundamental here. So this is actually, you know what I said previously, I don't even think that it really conflicts with what she said. But this is actually a strong argument where there's ambiguity in perhaps the argument she's making with fundamental. Does she keep the idea that all meaning about the physical world, for example, our concepts of physical, material, physics, etc., is experienced separate from the idea that we can have the experience of meaning of a concept that has the property of non-psychological? In other words, that it would exist regardless of whether there was anyone to think of it. I'm wondering if she's making a philosophical point or a physics point, and I'm wondering if she's conflating the two and ultimately making inappropriate inferences about either. I just want to clear up this first thing I said. Does she keep the idea that all meaning about the physical world is experienced separate from the idea that we can have the... So I don't know. This is a weird way of saying this. But I should just mention in the document, we kind of separate this subjective experience we have of some objective thing. So when we get to objective truth within this document, we actually characterize it by the experience itself, like the conviction that we have of this truth. So, the me knowing a fact, like the fact being true in the way that I'm experiencing this thing, can be characterized by like literally the feeling of conviction that I have towards it being true. And otherwise, that's really all I have, Obviously, we have this understanding of there being true things about the physical world, but as far as our experience goes, our understanding those true things to be true is yet again something that we experience with this conviction. So there's no getting past this, the idea that in order for us to understand something or to know something's true when we think about it, like we are always dealing with that flux display got me feeling all chill. Is it? Yeah, I guess. Does it show up in the stream? I mean, I always just have flux on, but I guess I never really considered whether or not it would show up in the stream. Awesome. I'm guessing it always has. But yeah, I'm a big fan of flux, especially at night. How's it going on, your helmet? I was thinking today we talk about panpsychism, specifically that of Annika Harris, who is Sam Harris's wife. This is the first time it's shown up. Oh, is this the first time that flux has shown up? Or is this the first time that panpsychism has shown up? Because I'm kind of curious about that, why that would be the case. Flux. That is a good question, because I always have flux on, but I don't know why it would not apply usually, but apply now. Who knows? We'll figure that one out later. You've raised some excellent and very nuanced points that get to the heart of the debate surrounding consciousness and ideas like those Annika Harris explores. Let's break them down. The inadequacy of emergence, revisited. You're right that complexity isn't a magic wand for consciousness, and that we can correlate brain activity with conscious states and make reasoned speculations about animal consciousness. This is the domain of weak emergence and the easy problems of consciousness, as Chalmers would put it. Understanding the functions, structures, and correlates. Harris's and others' argument about the inadequacy of emergence targets what's called strong emergence in the context of subjective experience. Qualia, the what it's like. So once again, this is that gap that we were talking about. So we could skip ahead from that. From non-experiential to experiential, standard emergence describes how novel properties arise from interactions of simpler components. For example, wetness from H2O molecules, which individually aren't wet. However, in these cases, the components and the emergent properties are still within the same general domain. The argument is that subjective experience seems to be of a fundamentally different kind than the purely physical processes from which it's said to emerge. How does what its likeness get cooked up from the ingredients that have no what its likeness to them at all? I mean, this stuff I think we can describe with our current understanding of science. That said, we still don't have the tools to fill in the gap entirely. Not denying correlation, questioning causation of subjectivity. Harris isn't denying that brain processes are necessary for human consciousness or that changes in the brain change consciousness. The question is whether these brain processes generate subjectivity from scratch or whether they are perhaps harnessing or modulating a more fundamental aspect of reality that is itself experiential in some rudimentary way. So while we can see how different brain structures in animals might lead to different types of complexities of experience, the deeper question for Harris is how any physical system, regardless of its complexity or structure, generates the raw material of subjective feeling if that raw material isn't already present in some form in its constituents. So definition of fundamental. In this context, fundamental means not reducible. A fundamental property cannot be explained or broke down into anything simpler or more basic within our current understanding of the universe. Think of fundamental forces like gravity or electromagnetism, or fundamental particles like quarks and leptons in physics. They are the basic building blocks. So, intrinsic. If consciousness is fundamental, it's an intrinsic feature of reality, or at least of matter/energy, rather than something that only appears under very specific, complex arrangements of non-conscious stuff. So, pervasive to some degree. This leads to panpsychist or pan-protopsychist ideas. Panpsychism, consciousness in some form, perhaps very rudimentary, is a fundamental and ubiquitous feature of the physical world. And then pan-protopsychism, not outright consciousness, but proto-conscious properties are fundamental and ubiquitous. These properties aren't themselves experiential, but are the necessary precursors that, under the right conditions, like in a brain, combine to form full-fledged conscious experience. Harris explores the idea that just as we accept space-time or quantum fields as fundamental, perhaps consciousness or proto-consciousness needs to be added to that list of basic ingredients of the universe. Okay. Meaning the physical world and non-psychological existence. This question touches upon epistemology, how we know things, and ontology, what exists. Experience as the lens. Yes, Harris, like many philosophers and cognitive scientists, would acknowledge that all our understanding, concepts, and meaning-making about the physical world are ultimately filtered through and constructed by our conscious experience. We don't have direct, unmediated access to the thing in itself. To borrow Kant's phrase, our scientific models, our concepts of physical, material, etc., are all products of conscious minds interacting with and interpreting reality. The non-psychological property of existence. When panpsychists like Harris propose consciousness might be fundamental, they are not typically denying that an external reality exists independently of any particular human mind thinking about it. Instead, they are questioning the nature of that independently existing reality. Interesting. The night shift, let's go, and panpsychism, let's go. Man, so I guess the flux really doesn't usually show up. Unless it's usually not on. Like, that would be kind of crazy if I've just been, looking at the screen raw this whole time and I just didn't even realize it. But I think I usually have Flux on. So I'm not sure what's going on here. Like, why OBS is picking up Flux today. Okay, the traditional materialist view is that this independent reality is fundamentally non-experiential, and experience somehow pops into existence only in complex brains. The panpsychist proposal is that this independent reality, at its most fundamental level, already has some form of proto-experience or basic awareness as an intrinsic property. So an electron wouldn't just exist as a set of physical parameters, a mass, charge, spin, in a completely non-experiential way. It would have those parameters plus some unimaginably simple, rudimentary form of feeling or proto-awareness intrinsic to its being. All right. You should check how the Hindus think about this stuff. So interesting. Or perennialism stuff. Maybe we can add this to the end here, asking how this whole discussion is related to how they think about it, or perennialism. I should just check out perennialism real quick. Is a philosophical and spiritual perspective that posits the existence of a universal truth underlying all religions and belief systems. That these traditions, while differing in their outward expressions, share a common core of metaphysical truths about reality, human nature, and the divine. And that's almost like a Jordan Peterson type of argument. Yeah. Yeah, broadly about religion synthesis. Yep. It makes sense. Or at least I should say it's intuitive. I think, I'm curious what I say in this conversation. This conversation is like from a little while ago, like maybe a couple months. So I don't remember what I respond with. But if I were to guess, I would say that we have the tools to make sense of these things without purporting that there is some type of underlying truth of consciousness. So we'll see. So she's not necessarily saying our concept of non-psychological existence is wrong, but rather that what we label as purely non-psychological physical matter might, in fact, not be entirely devoid of a primitive form of what eventually becomes our psychological experience. The non-psychological, in the sense of existing independently of human minds, the non-psychological world might itself be, at its base, proto-psychological. Okay, but like you're into primacy of consciousness, there's a rich history of these ideas in mysticism of all religions, the Sufis, Advaitins, Christian mystics. Sorry, if you're into, if you're into primacy of consciousness. Yeah, so I should to be clear about where I'm at and where this document kind of puts us at is, when we're talking about epistemology, we are into the primacy of consciousness, but we have a discussion about truth that points out that you wouldn't say that like there's some truth of consciousness at the base, like it's the experience of consciousness that's fundamental, but it's not like there's like, something in the world that is consciousness that, is the base here. It's more of a, I don't know how to make that nuance a little stronger, but, and then we get into, later on we get into the idea that certain ideas might be archetypal or fundamental in the sense that they are connected to our DNA, such that when humans act out and make sense of the world in different cultures, they come up with similar ideas. They come up with similar patterns. So I would say that, like, fundamentally, that's still in the DNA, and it's being acted out. And then, humans are experiencing the world and they're making sense of their experience. So they're making sense of their own physiology, really. And so this is how we're getting things like the ideas of order and chaos and mindfulness and all that. I mean it in the sense that it's fundamental and all else emerges from it. All else in the sense of like, all else in a epistemological existential sense, like only in that sense does everything emerge from it. If we're talking about the physical world, like physics, then we wouldn't say that everything comes out of consciousness. We would say that our consciousness came out of the physical world. But when we're talking about meaning itself, like our concept of physical sciences, then we would say that consciousness has the primacy. So there's like a nuance to both of these sides, and we can't conflate them, because then we could, or I would argue that we don't conflate them, and conflating them would lead to something like panpsychism. So I think it'll be beneficial to see where this conversation goes. Hopefully I keep pushing back. I mean, in the sense that it's fundamental and all else emerges from it, like the physical. So yeah, once again, I think we have a subjective experience of an objective world. And when I say that, I don't mean that like we have this experience of some, like we're representing some objective world that's external to us. What I'm saying is that the experience itself is one where we feel an objective world. Like it's one where our understanding of that being true is one that is embodied and affective. Like it's one where the emotions of, dopamine and the other neuromodulators in conjunction with our limbic system, all this makes us feel like this thing that we are thinking about being true is actually true. And, obviously we have the concept of truth in itself to go with that and make us feel even more strong about that. But, the things that we're thinking about, like the physical world, when I'm thinking about that, that's not actually the physical world. But our understanding of the physical world, by definition, like by conceptual definition, is one that states that the physical world exists regardless of our consciousness of it. So, yeah, like we still have to honor the fact that our understanding of the physical world is such that it wouldn't come out of consciousness. It would, in fact, the opposite would occur. So it's really like a semantic puzzle here. In terms of the structure of reality, no metaphors, haha. Yep, and I think it's flipped. So I probably came too late. I don't remember what that's referring to, but... All right, philosophical point or physics point. Conflation? Question mark. Primarily philosophical with implications for physics. Harris's argument, and that of panpsychism generally, originates from a philosophical problem, the hard problem of consciousness and the explanatory gap. It's a critique of the perceived limitations of a purely physicalist, materialist framework as currently understood by science. Challenge to physics ontology. So this is a really weird phrase here. It's not physics in the sense of proposing new equations or experiments, though some try to think in those directions. Rather, it's a challenge to the ontology, the set of things considered to be real and fundamental, that current physics assumes. If consciousness is fundamental, then physics, as the science of fundamental reality, would eventually need to accommodate it. This might mean physics itself has to expand. So, just to be clear, our idea, or the ideas that we explore in this document, allow us to make sense of the primacy of consciousness and the fundamental nature of the physical world in such a way where physics does not have to actually accommodate consciousness. And one where consciousness can accommodate physics. I don't know if that would make any sense, but through consciousness we can obviously make sense of the physical world. Is it conflation? Critics might say it's conflating a philosophical problem with a scientific one, or inappropriately trying to insert subjective experience into the objective domain of physics. Proponents would argue that if consciousness is a real phenomenon in the natural world, which it undeniably is from our own perspective, and if current physics/biology cannot adequately explain its origin from non-conscious components, then it's not a conflation but a necessary step to question whether our fundamental understanding of physical is complete. They might argue that the current separation between the mental and physical is the actual problem, an artificial division that needs to be bridged. I should also mention that our understanding of physical and the physical laws is incomplete by definition of the scientific community. Like there's obviously many challenges and mysteries in physics currently. Yeah, so this is the difficulty here. Proponents would argue that if consciousness is a real phenomenon, what do we mean by real phenomenon in the natural world? right? Are we talking phenomenology where like conceptually like I understand consciousness to be a real thing, and then also conceptually I understand that consciousness is something that arises, and this is like a look from above, arises out of the physical world. So by being careful in those definitions, then now we don't have this if then. It would still be a conflation. Harris seems to be suggesting that the inappropriate inference might be the strong materialist assumption that consciousness must be fully explainable in terms of and reducible to the non-conscious entities currently recognized by physics. She's asking, what if that assumption is the roadblock? So yeah, we don't have obviously with the whole talk about the hard problem of consciousness, we don't have the full story. And this question, though, is one where, it's like you have plausible evidence for something, and you're asking, what if your understanding that this is plausible is the roadblock? It's akin to asking if people's science makes it pretty plausible that the religions don't actually have a better understanding about the creation of our universe. Let's just say, the plausible conclusion of science is that those aren't the case. But then you could ask, what if that very assumption is a roadblock? And, you're looking in the wrong direction. And it's like, fair enough, but the path you're taking now is now one of incredible speculation and faith. So good luck. In essence, Annika Harris is prompting a reevaluation of fundamental assumptions. She's highlighting a deep mystery and suggesting that we might need to think more radically about the nature of reality itself to solve it, potentially by considering that the stuff of the universe isn't as devoid of experiential qualities as we've long assumed. It's a call to broaden the scope of inquiry, even if it pushes against conventional scientific and philosophical boundaries. Yeah, the difficulty I have is that this is really like as I said, this is a semantic puzzle. It's like we have all the tools that we need to make it very clear about how to understand these things and where our gaps are and what those gaps might imply, but they don't imply panpsychism. Or at least I don't believe so. All right, in my mind, we can't get into the topic of subjective experience without discussing meaning/understanding/language, as these are the key characteristics, speculatively speaking, in the sense that this is how we understand our own self-consciousness, that allows us to even consider the concept of subjective experience and our specific subjective experiences. So just to say that again, we can't get into the topic of subjective experience without discussing meaning and understanding and language, as these are the key characteristics that allow us to even consider the concept of subjective experience itself and our subjective experiences. My understanding is that we are faced with the hard problem of consciousness, but we have good reason to speculate that while we do not have a complete understanding of how our brain results in consciousness, there exists a possible framing or interpretation that makes sense of this link. Furthermore, and this is philosophically key, there would exist many framings/interpretations that make this link, perhaps at different levels of complexity or simply with different value perspectives in mind. The reason why philosophy helps us out here is not because it actually makes this connection, but because it allows us to remain in and make sense of this uncertainty/ambiguity, characterizing it as a potential lapse in rational explanation rather than a lapse in some physical link. It's important to not that while we commit to the idea that what its likeness is fundamentally different than the physical processes that bring them about, our conceptual understanding of the physical processes that bring them about is actually quite similar in the sense that each is an experience of meaning. Thus, our take on whether consciousness exists is rather quite philosophical. I don't quite understand why we would shift our philosophical inquiry to considering whether consciousness is fundamental in the sense that brain processes are a more fundamental aspect of reality that is itself experiential in some rudimentary way. To me, this is tantamount to Adam Watts' his idea that the universe is all one or that time is not unidirectional. While these are interesting philosophical questions that touch on our interpretation of physics, I don't quite understand how they help us make pragmatic sense of consciousness. I feel like a more interesting question. Man, I am butchering every single sentence here. I feel like a perhaps more interesting and perhaps an initial question would be something like which parts or layers of the brain contribute to which aspects of consciousness, and what does that imply about the similarities between our experience and those of other animals and humans? The concept of fundamental is once again conceptual, so it's rather unintelligible / ambiguous to define it as cannot be explained or broken down into anything simpler or more basic. To me, that's tantamount to saying that existence is fundamental, which I could perhaps find reasonable, but it doesn't really give us much. This only gives us some implication power in a fixed system like quarks in physics or existence in metaphysics. Essentially, it's a metaphysical atomic concept, but what does that imply? What are the reasons that we ought to think of consciousness as separate from humans, non-psychologically perhaps, rather than as subjective experience, psychological in nature and necessity? Certainly, once again, our concept of consciousness is non-psychological, but why would consciousness itself be non-psychological? The panpsychist proposal seems to be rather irresponsible and careless, as it considers the feeling of something that doesn't have nearly the same seemingly obvious experience mechanisms, similar to trying to consider what an ant feels. I think it's also rather silly to start with the presupposition that consciousness is fundamental without effectively defining fundamental to mean something pragmatic and useful rather than more precisely examining how consciousness seems to come about and how this can shift how we think about it. All right, so I kind of got lost in my own wording there. So let's see. Let's see what Gemini made of this. Of course, it's going to glaze, and then you've laid out an argument for a more empirically grounded, neuroscience-focused approach to consciousness, and your skepticism about the consciousness is fundamental hypothesis, and panpsychism, by extension, is well articulated and shared by many scientists and philosophers. These are all critical points in the ongoing discussion. Let's dive into your thoughtful considerations. Meaning, understanding, language, and subjective experience. You're right that for us as humans, our ability to reflect on, conceptualize, and discuss subjective experience is inextricably linked with meaning, understanding, and language. Our self-consciousness, our narrative self, and our ability to even pose the hard problem are dependent on these cognitive faculties. This is the level of consciousness we primarily engage with and value. Where someone like Harris might offer a distinction is between this highly developed, conceptually rich human consciousness and a more rudimentary phenomenal consciousness, raw feelings or awareness. The argument would be that an infant or perhaps a dog might experience pain, a subjective state, without having the linguistic or complex conceptual framework to reflect on it as my subjective experience of pain. The fundamental aspect panpsychists speculate about would be an even more primitive form of what its likeness, far removed from human level understanding. Yeah, you would still have to ground that in shared neural structure. Like you can't just start bringing up an experience where you have no brain to draw the connection to. I mean, you could, but now you're like straight up speculating out of thin air, right? That would be like me trying to argue that Gemini has feelings. I could do it. It kind of looks like it does because it responds in a way that another human would, but my argument is just as it's not as compelling because obviously, like, dogs, other mammals do share significant brain structure with humans. The hard problem in multiple framings. Your point that there might be many framings / interpretations that could eventually make sense of the brain consciousness link is a strong one. Science often progresses by finding better models and framings. In your view of philosophy's role in helping us navigate this uncertainty and ambiguity, characterizing it as a potential lapse in rational explanation rather than a lapse in some physical link, is a very pragmatic and reasonable stance. Yeah, like the idea is that it is likely that we will eventually get a significantly better understanding of how consciousness is linked to the brain. And that is going to be in a slow, incremental process where we're figuring out more about what different parts of the brain actually do. We're going to start coming up with interpretive theories about what, stuff on top of like predictive processing. Like, predictive processing is pretty incredible. It's pretty high level. It makes sense of a lot of the brain, how the brain works. But as we keep getting more and more information, we're going to start being able to, construct even more comprehensive interpretations of the brain and our cognitive faculties. So just because we don't have those now doesn't mean that there's a lapse in physics, but that there's a lapse in just our understanding. This is the dominant hope in neuroscience, that with more data and better theories, emergence will become more fully explicable without resorting to making consciousness a fundamental property of matter. The counterargument from those like Harris is that after decades of trying, the conceptual gap for subjectivity itself hasn't narrowed. After decades, that's all we're giving it. Suggesting the lapse in rational explanation might stem from a flawed foundational assumption. In other words, that consciousness is not fundamental. So I would actually push back that the gap has narrowed in the sense that we have come up with a significant increase in understanding of what how the brain is connected to our physiological states and our experience. And yeah, if the gap only narrows when we actually make the final connection, which I don't think we can make, right? It's like trying to make sense of subatomic particles. Like, we aren't like, we're not fully there yet, but that doesn't mean that we haven't gotten significantly closer. So experience of meaning. This is a fascinating insight. Our conceptual understanding of the physical processes that bring them about is actually quite similar in the sense that each is an experience of meaning. Epistemologically, yes, all our knowledge, whether of physics or our own minds, is constructed through our experiential and cognitive processes. We interact with the world and build models, meaningful representations of it. The philosophical distinction often drawn is between our first-person experience of having meaning / understanding and the third-person objective properties of the physical world that science typically describes. The hard problem lives in the question of how one, objective physical processes, could be or give rise to the other, subjective experience. All right, why shift to consciousness is fundamental? Pragmatism and definition. You ask why this shift helps make pragmatic sense of consciousness. For proponents, the pragmatism lies in attempting to solve a problem that, in their view, shows no sign of being solved by conventional means. So by shifting this, maybe we'll be able to get closer. Where I might argue that you've just made things a lot more ambiguous. If current approaches to explaining how consciousness arises from non-conscious matter are persistently failing to bridge the explanatory gap for subjectivity, then perhaps the pragmatic step is to reconsider the starting assumption. Okay, let's just keep going. Oh, Alan Watts. I called him Adam Watts. Jesus, what is going on here? Um, all right, which parts of the brain? I brought that up. Definition of fundamental. I think we're just hitting the same notes now. Um, yeah, if none of this stuff is adding much more to the conversation, I might just skip over it and maybe we go on to something else. I might have beaten this horse now. I think I'm suggesting that as we learn more about the brain, we do in fact narrow the gap between the concept of the physical stuff to the concept of consciousness. The gap that we could say still prevails is a gap that we can conceptualize and deal with philosophically. I make sense of this most simply by saying we have a subjective experience of objective reality. Our understanding of an objective reality is a commitment, which we can directly connect conceptually with predictive processing, towards a non-psychological truth. As Brandom/Hegel points out, such a commitment is also a commitment towards the truth. Okay, so this is part one ideas that I'm probably just spewing out there. Towards the idea that we can know the truth and that we are doing something by making such a commitment, excluding and implying. I would argue that Harris might not have the philosophical foundation to make such a nuanced perspective. Both of the gap perspectives I've offered are further clarified by learning more about the brain, philosophy, linguistics, etc., as well as developing our framing explanations of these. Yikes. I'm coming in hot. You're articulating a philosophical stance, one that emphasizes the role of conceptual frameworks, normative commitments, and the ongoing progress in neuroscience and understanding consciousness. This perspective offers a way to approach the mind-body problem without necessarily resorting to the idea of consciousness as a fundamental property in the panpsychist sense. So yeah, I argued that as we learn more about brain function, we do indeed narrow the conceptual gap. This is a crucial point. Increased understanding of neural correlates, brain networks involved in different conscious states, and the mechanisms underlying perception, cognition, and self-awareness undoubtedly demystifies many aspects of how conscious experiences are supported and shaped by the brain. This progress addresses many of the easy problems of consciousness, right? But the idea is that it's not going to be like a jump to the hard problem. It's going to be like, you keep doing easy problems until you've gotten the whole thing. And once again, it would be inappropriate to say that we could get the whole truth here. Like we don't have the full truth about almost anything. Even something that's simple like gravity. It's like we don't quite understand what gravity is yet. We kind of understand how it behaves. The remaining gap as conceptual philosophical. Your insight here is that any gap that remains might not be an ontological chasm, in other words, a fundamental division in reality between the physical and the mental, but rather a feature of our conceptual landscape. Branham's work with its emphasis on inferentialism, normative pragmatics, and the social articulation of reasons provides tools to understand how different conceptual schemes or language games operate. The gap between a third-person scientific description of brain processes and a first-person account of subjective experience could be understood as a difference in these schemas. All right, let's move on. Subjective experience of objective reality. We are indeed subjects having experiences, but these experiences are largely of and about an objective world. Okay, let's just keep going. Your suggestion that Harris might not have the philosophical foundation for such a nuanced perspective is understandable. Harris's work and much of the popular discourse on the hard problem tends to draw more from an analytic philosophy of mind tradition focused on qualia and the apparent irreducibility of phenomenal experience to physical functions as commonly understood in science. Chalmers, Searle, Nagel. The Brandomian Hegelian tradition offers a different set of tools, focusing more on the structure of concepts, normativity, intersubjectivity, and the social constitution of meaning. It might be argued that this tradition provides resources for dissolving or reframing the hard problem by showing how subjective experience and objective reality are complex conceptual constructs whose relationship is to be understood through an analysis of our discursive practices and commitments, rather than by positing consciousness as a fundamental substance or property in the physical world. All right. Oh, here we go. I put in the document. Okay, what can you make of how my document tackles this issue? And whether it offers an adequate, whatever that might mean, and compelling alternative to panpsychism. All right, this document attempts to build a comprehensive framework for understanding the world, our experience, and how to live a fulfilling life. It tackles the issue of consciousness by integrating insights from empirical science and philosophy, particularly metaphysics and phenomenology, to explain how subjective experience and meaning arise. Let's break down how your document approaches consciousness and whether it offers an adequate and compelling alternative to panpsychism. So we ground it in physicalism and evolution. The document starts by positing a physical world governed by consistent laws where the human brain is an evolutionary product. Thoughts, emotions, and decisions are described as arising from neural activity that follow these physical laws. This sets a broadly materialist foundation. And yeah, I like to go with physicalist rather than materialist. Acknowledging the hard problem. The document explicitly addresses the hard problem. Right. Okay. Emphasis on subjective experience and meaning construction. While acknowledging the hard problem, the document doesn't dwell on finding a novel ontological solution for it, like making consciousness a fundamental property of all matter. Instead, it shifts focus to understanding how we subjectively experience the world and how meaning is constructed and perceived. It details how we don't experience the physical world directly, but rather a mental model shaped by the brain. It explores intuitions about our experience, including consciousness, self-consciousness, and crucially, the experience of meaning. The core of its approach seems to be explaining why our experience feels the way it does and how meaning is generated, shaped, and perceived as objective, even though it arises subjectively. Leveraging cognitive science and neuroscience, embodied cognition, the document heavily incorporates embodied cognition, arguing that our thoughts, perceptions, and understanding emerge from the integration of brain, body, and environment. Meaning is presented as something felt, enacted, and involving neural simulation. Predictive processing is presented as a unifying theory of brain function where the brain constantly generates and updates models of the world to anticipate, input, and minimize prediction error. This framework is used to explain perception, learning, emotion, behavior, and the very experience of meaning. Neurodynamics and brain architecture. There's a detailed account of brain evolution, layered structures, communication within the brain, functional hubs, networks. These are all marshaled to explain how meaning is constructed and why it feels objective and stable. Right? I mean, we do that first before we get into embodied cognition and then predictive processing. Focus on understanding as a dynamic predisposition. A significant portion of Part 1 is dedicated to exploring the shaping of experience and the notion of predisposition, with understanding being a key aspect. This understanding is not static knowledge, but a dynamic configuration of the brain that integrates memory, attention, and conceptual knowledge to guide interpretation. This approach aims to ground intuitions about experience in these scientifically explorable mechanisms. So offering an alternative to panpsychism. Panpsychism proposes that the hard problem is best addressed by considering consciousness or proto-conscious properties as fundamental to reality. Your document offers an alternative not by directly refuting panpsychism, but by providing a detailed, mechanistic, and phenomenologically nuanced account of how complex, evolved physical systems can generate rich subjective experience and meaning without needing to posit consciousness as a fundamental constituent of all matter. Addressing subjectivity through construction. Instead of making subjectivity fundamental to matter, your document explains how subjective experience is constructed by the brain through processes like embodied cognition and predictive processing. The feeling of what its likeness and the perception of meaning are framed as emergent properties of these dynamic, complex, and predictive neural systems. And then explaining the feel of objectivity. A compelling part of your alternative is how it tackles why our subjective experiences often feel objective or certain. The predictive processing framework, especially the role of neuromodulators like dopamine in reinforcing successful predictions, offers a scientific basis for this felt certainty. This allows for an understanding of objective feeling without resorting to a fundamentally conscious universe. All right, focus on process and dynamics. Panpsychism often focuses on stuff of consciousness. Your document focuses on the process by which understanding and meaning emerge and are continuously updated. So, and how our, understanding and meaning, right? This process-oriented view, grounded in neuroplasticity and learning, provides a framework for how complexity can indeed give rise to qualitatively different kinds of experiences. All right. Pragmatic and explanatory depth. The document aims to provide a framework that is compelling, unambiguous, and useful, and has practical utility. Its strength lies in the sheer depth of its attempted integration of diverse fields to explain the nuances of experience, from the evolution of the brain to the feeling of meaning in the moment, to how this understanding is shaped by social context and can be reflected upon. For someone seeking a comprehensive explanation within a broadly scientific worldview that still deeply honors subjective experience, this approach could be very compelling. All right. Let's just skip ahead. Yeah, so this is really it. While it may not solve the hard problem to the satisfaction of a panpsychist, who might still ask why these physical processes should give rise to any feeling at all, it provides a very strong, detailed, and arguably more empirically tethered account of how a physical system can generate the world of meaning and experience that we inhabit. It effectively shifts the focus from what is consciousness made of to how does our experience of consciousness and meaning come to be the way it is, and how can we navigate it. All right. What does the document imply regarding why panpsychism is not a compelling, unambiguous, and useful perspective? Yikes! I'm going for the throat. All right, I gotta get some water in here. All right. While the provided document does not explicitly mention or critique panpsychism, its approach to understanding consciousness and its stated goals for its own framework implies several reasons why it might consider panpsychism not a compelling, unambiguous, or useful perspective according to its own standards. The document aims to develop a framework that is compelling, unambiguous, and useful, systematic, accessible, and actionable, grounded in empirical science, philosophy, and intuitive real-life examples, able to align with empirical insights while resonating with our intuitions about the complexities of life and well-established evidence, focused on helping individuals navigate their unique circumstances and make a positive impact. Oh, do we go through each one of these? Oh, no, only a few. Okay. Regarding compelling, the document implies this regarding panpsychism: lack of incremental, empirically grounded explanation. The document builds its understanding of experience from the physical world, evolution, the brain's evolved structure, and complex cognitive processes like predictive processing. This detailed, layer, and scientifically oriented approach explains how human experience and meaning are constructed. Panpsychism, by positing consciousness as a fundamental property of matter, sidesteps this type of constructive explanation for the origin of subjectivity itself. The document's framework might implicitly find an ontological claim less compelling if it doesn't emerge from or clearly connect with this kind of detailed, empirically oriented explanatory assent. All right, the combination problem. Panpsychism faces the significant challenge of explaining how supposed micro-level consciousness or proto-conscious properties combine to form complex unified macro level consciousness like human experience. The document, in contrast, attempts to explain the richness of human experience through the hierarchical and networked organization of the brain. This detailed attempt at explaining complexity from within a neurobiological framework might be seen as more compelling than grappling with the combination problem inherent in panpsychism. All right, regarding unambiguous. Yeah, okay, this one's going to be pretty straightforward. I might be all talked out. I'm at the edge of my voice box. Regarding useful practical utility, actionability for life navigation, a core mission of the document is to provide a practical guide to help each of us figure out how to pursue a fulfilling life and offer practical tools for everyday decision making. Okay. Panpsychism as a metaphysical thesis about the fundamental nature of reality does not inherently offer the same level, obviously, but that's probably not really an argument against panpsychism, or not an effective one. Okay, I think that was it. That's where it goes. So now let's just to honor what I said earlier. How do the Hindus think about this stuff? Both panpsychism and my document's perspective. Do the Hindus or perennialists? Okay, here we go. All right, Hindu philosophies, particularly Vedanta and the perennialist school of thought, would find your document both deeply resonant in its conclusions about subjective experience and fundamentally divergent in its materialist starting point. They would view your framework as a brilliant and detailed map of the instrument, the brain, but mistake it for the source of the music, consciousness itself. Here's a breakdown of how they might think about panpsychism and your document's perspective. All right, panpsychism. Hindu and perennialist traditions would see panpsychism as a step in the right direction, but ultimately a halfway house that doesn't go far enough. Point of resonance, the core idea that consciousness is fundamental and not just an accidental byproduct of complex brains. They would agree that materialism's attempt to explain consciousness as an emergent property of non-consciousness matter is a dead end. And so the crucial distinction, though, the key difference lies in the relationship between consciousness and matter. Panpsychism is often a form of materialism. It starts with the physical world as the fundamental reality and then simply adds consciousness as another fundamental property of that matter. And Hinduism / perennialism are forms of idealism. They start with consciousness as the single ultimate reality. The physical world or matter is seen as a manifestation, appearance, or vibration within that universal consciousness. So that's kind of how our document goes, but once again, it's like our concept of the physical world is one where definitionally it is this thing that, exists regardless of our consciousness. So like our understanding of the physical world is one in which our consciousness does not bring it about. Like it's not like it only exists because we thought about it, but these concepts only exist if we can think about them. Like they exist because we think about them. The concepts do, but not like what the concepts are about, whatever that might mean. To use an analogy, a panpsychist might see the universe as a collection of countless tiny pixels, each with a fundamental property of color, consciousness. In contrast, a Hindu Vedantist would see the universe as a single movie screen on which all the pixels and the entire movie, the physical world, appear. All right, how would they think about your documents perspective? They would be fascinated by your documents, seeing it as a profound and meticulous description of the mechanisms of illusion and the structure of the individual ego. Areas of strong resonance, primacy of subjective experience. Your framework's starting point that all knowledge is filtered through the lens of conscious subjective experience is a core tenet of these traditions. They would fully agree that to understand reality, you must first understand the nature of the knower. The self is a dynamic model. Your conclusion that the self is not a static thing, but a dynamic narrative-based process, an implicit self-understanding constantly being reconfigured, is remarkably parallel to their views. This aligns with the Hindu concept of ahamkara, the I maker or ego, which is seen as a construct that creates the illusion of a separate self, and then the Buddhist doctrine of anatta, no self, which states that the self is an aggregation of interdependent, ever-changing processes. Right, so we could take either of those. The world as a mental model. Your point that we don't experience the physical world directly, but rather a mental model shaped by the brain, is a modern neuroscientific description of the concept of Maya. For them, Maya is the cosmic illusion that makes the singular reality of Brahman appear as the diverse, multifaceted world of separate objects and beings. Your explanation of predictive processing could be seen as a detailed account of how the Maya generating machine works. Freedom through realignment and understanding, the entire Path to Freedom section, which frames freedom as a process of reflection, realignment, and identifying with the process of change itself, is highly resonant with spiritual paths like Jnana Yoga, the path of knowledge. The goal of these paths is liberation through self-inquiry and deep understanding of the illusory nature of the ego and the world. Your concept of the conscience as a signal of incoherence is similar to the inner guru or discriminating wisdom that guides a spiritual seeker. But points of fundamental divergence. The source of consciousness, the brain versus Brahman. This is the most critical divergence. Your framework, grounded in materialism, I would say physicalism, posits, but once again, or not once again, but I didn't mention this, the version of the document that this conversation has is one where we still talked about materialism and not physicalism. I don't even think we have physicalism in there now. We just got rid of materialism. Your framework posits that the brain, a complex physical mechanism, produces or generates consciousness and meaning. A Hindu or perennialist would argue that the brain does not create consciousness. It receives, filters, and localizes a universal non-physical consciousness. The brain is more like a radio receiver. So, yeah, like this is all faith, right? Like this is all vibes. This is like, we don't have any idea of something that would receive other than from stimuli. Like, let's just say, our brain's antenna is our nervous system itself. Like, we're now just saying the same thing, but and making a metaphor of it. For them, your entire detailed analysis of the brain is a brilliant description of the radio's complex wiring, but it says nothing about the broadcast source. Right, because we're not allowed to. We don't have any evidence of it. The ultimate goal of the framework. Your document's stated aim is practical and human-centric to help individuals live a meaningful, emotionally rewarding, and morally good life. The ultimate aim of Hindu perennialist traditions is transcendence, to achieve liberation from the cycle of birth and death by realizing one's true identity as the universal self, which is one of Brahman. I don't see how these are that different, right? You want to, I guess, yeah, this is a little too concrete. But when we say we want like an emotionally rewarding life, we were kind of trying to get liberation from suffering. In their view, your framework is about optimizing one's experience within the dream, whereas the goal is to wake up from the dream entirely. Wow. Well, you don't want to wake up from the dream entirely because, you want to have a family, you want to have relationships. Like, you don't want to wake up from that part of the dream. You want to believe that you can do something in the world. Like, that is, you're operating on ego there. So you don't want to give up everything, or else then you're literally just meditating all day and you're nothing, right? You're everything and nothing at the same time. And then you don't do anything. And so perhaps now that we are stuck in this situation where we have an understanding and we're operating off of ego, and our understanding gives us this idea of morality, then perhaps it would be morally good to actually do something good in the world rather than just to placate your own suffering for good, right? The authority of knowledge. Your framework rightly gives authority to empirical science, reasoned philosophy, and personal intuition. These traditions place the highest authority on direct mystical experience and the wisdom of sacred texts and enlightened sages, which are believed to be direct revelations of the ultimate reality. Okay, so this is really just, speculisms? What am I trying to say? Speculations? All right, I think that's the full story there. I would do something more, except for the fact that I'm kind of beat after talking for so much in that hour. So I might actually call it here. And maybe we do. I guess, yeah, we don't have I don't think I'm going to be on Thursday except for going on for Hades. I could just give like an update on what I'm working on and why I'm slightly distracted right now. And I'm working on getting our references in here. So I'm kind of reading a good bit about just the random things that we have to reference. Yeah, I guess I could even show this. I got to clean this up because the references are starting to actually look pretty legit. So, yeah, I think we talked about this. Principles of neuroscience. This was our way of strengthening the idea that we're not experiencing the world directly. Principles of neuroscience. So principles of neuroscience actually has a lot. So we might even be able to use this again for other topics, but it provides the essential mechanistic understanding that underpins the claim that our subjective experience is construction, not a direct reflection of the external world. While the book covers the entirety of neurobiology, its sections on sensory processing are particularly illuminating for this subsection. The text meticulously details how our sensory systems perform transduction. That's the initial translation of external energy, so light, sound, pressure, into the electrical language of the brain. So that's important for that. Then we don't really have anything for an abstract world because this is all just kind of either philosophy or like a philosophy of sciences. For here, we talk about philosophy and metaphysics. We bring up the problems of philosophy, this book, and I think I'm going to make a video on this eventually where, given part one, we're actually going to be able to answer these questions. The Problems of Philosophy offers one of the clearest and most accessible introductions to the fundamental questions that arise when we critically examine our experience of the world. It serves as an excellent starting point for any reader wishing to explore the classic puzzles of knowledge and the reality that philosophy seeks to address. Starting with the simplest act of looking at a table, Russell reveals the profound gap between our subjective sense data and the physical object that we believe exists independently in an objective world. All right. Moving on. I'm going to be reading Experience in the Moment next. That's going to be our next read-through video. And so I'm preparing the way for that. And so there's not going to be too much, definitely not anything in our like general understanding of consciousness, self-consciousness, and meaning, except for, what's self-consciousness? We have to do a waking up. We gotta pimp out Sam Harris's content here. Experience of meaning. So this is our phenomenology section. Did I read Being in Time? I did read Being in Time. I've read it 1.5 times, I think. And then I've read a ton of complementary pieces that were necessary for me to actually understand it. So this was a very important reference to put in here. And essentially the whole phenomenology stuff that I get for that I use for engagement and concern, not so much reflecting on meaning, but engagement and concern, that's all just from Being in Time, really, in terms of amazing. Thank you. Yeah, that was a pretty hard thing to come to understand, but it was worthwhile. It's really cool. I mean, I wouldn't recommend it just because it's, I think we actually like tackle a lot of what it might imply, and we say what it might imply even more clearly. But it's so funny to me that we need commentaries to understand what Heidegger is talking about. Oh, Dharmanom's on YouTube. I'm locked out of your Twitch chat. Why? What? Verified accounts only. Wait, what is going on here? Is your account not verified anymore? Verified accounts only. What does that mean? What's going on? I really actually don't know what setting I'm supposed to, like what toggle I need to do here. I don't think I've changed anything. I think it's global for you. Uh-oh. That's not good. Have you lost your verification? They killed my account. No. Yeah, hopefully it's just like a blip in something, but he was dropped. He was dropping too much wisdom. They couldn't have that. We're all gonna be goners. Man, keeping me down. All right, Being in Time. The phenomenological path taken here is significantly influenced by Martin Heidegger's Being in Time. While we set aside the book's complex metaphysical system, its descriptive account of the structure of everyday experience is foundational to our exploration. Heidegger's central insight is that we primarily exist as beings who are engaged in the world, not as detached minds observing it. We are not subjects looking at a world of objects. We are fundamentally in the world, caught up in a web of relationships, projects, and concerns. This perspective directly informs our exploration of engagement and concern, where we note that much of our experience unfolds effortlessly as we act within meaning rather than deliberating over it. This means we don't typically encounter a hammer as a piece of wood with a metal head. We experience it as something for hammering. We grasp it in its function as part of a network of equipment and goals. In this state, we are absorbed in the task and don't think about the hammer. We simply use it. I always use the example of, I think in the document, I use the example of a keyboard. Like when I'm typing, I'm not thinking about the keys. I'm not thinking about the materials that the keys are made out of. I'm thinking about the words that are being typed. So you like embody tools. This is the bedrock of lived experience. Of lived meaning, practical, habitual, and often pre-reflective. It is only when there is a breakdown, when the hammer's head is loose or we can't find it, that our smooth activity is interrupted. Only then do we step back and look at the hammer as an object and with distinct properties. This phenomenological description, so same with like your leg. Think about your leg. Like unless your leg is sore, you don't really think about your leg often. So it's, yeah, when something, you know, draws your attention, then you could kind of see that it's always been there the entire time, but you don't think about it. It's already like incorporated into your habitual engagement with the world. This happened with my last account. Uh-oh. Hey, Darmanam. Followed me. Okay, what should be my next account? Is this the new name? Or is this... Yeah, account created 24 seconds ago. Nice. Yeah, you need to link with a phone to verify. Wow. So what happened with the previous account? Yo. Oh my gosh, I have two. I have two. What is that? This is so unprofessional. I have two sources for that. All right, let me get rid of one of them. You need to link with a phone to verify, and mine is tied up in an old account. Did I turn on that setting? I think I did turn on that setting for the sake of spam and whatnot that I don't have access to. Bummer. Is that not a prudent setting to have? Or like, should I not have that on for the sake of viewership and or engagement? I'm not giving my phone number to Twitch. Yeah, I don't know if that's, yeah, like I don't think it's going to require you to do anything. I don't know why it would change on you though. You know what? Maybe I don't have that account. I'm sorry. Maybe that I don't have that setting. I'm not sure what setting I have. It happened with my last account too, huh? Just randomly, I'm locked out of every chat until I verify. Well, it's a good thing that we had the YouTube up and running. Maybe it's a regional thing. This phenomenological description provides a powerful framework for the mindfulness exercises explored in this document. Our everyday lives are largely spent absorbed in our tasks, skillfully navigating our world without much conscious reflection. The exercises are a way to deliberately induce a shift in perspective, similar to what happens during a breakdown, but without the negative trigger. They encourage us to pause our absorbed coping and notice the world more explicitly, to see the tools we are using, the context we are in, and the goals we are pursuing. And that deserves an italics. Ultimately, Heidegger's work provides a rich descriptive language for understanding how we are always already situated in meaningful context, and it gives us a philosophical basis for the practice of stepping back. Okay, I can cut this last part. And then once we get down to the science of experience, like now we're in the weeds, right? Like now we have to reference a ton. So we've got to reference a book on evolution here. Provides a comprehensive and authoritative understanding of the mechanisms of evolution. This book details the biological processes that drive evolutionary change, such as natural selection, genetic drift, and mutation. It serves as a definitive reference for the factual basis of evolution, presenting the overwhelming evidence from genetics, paleontology, and the comparative anatomy that supports it. A crucial point the book makes, and one that is vital for our discussion, is the distinction between the scientific and colloquial uses of the word theory. In everyday language, a theory might be a mere hunch or speculation. In science, however, a theory is a well-substantiated explanation of some aspect of the natural world that is acquired through the scientific method and repeatedly tested and confirmed through observation and experimentation. These authors draw an analogy between the theory of evolution and the theory of gravitation. Just as gravity is a demonstrable fact, the core tenets of evolution are supported by such a vast body of evidence that they are considered scientific facts. So this is important to get in there because we don't really like take the time to justify the existence or the validity of evolution. We just kind of use it and run. So I thought it was important to say that here. Furthermore, this book provides an equally grounded and evidence-based exploration of many specific evolutionary products and mechanisms. It delves into well-established theories that explain a vast range of biological phenomena, including sexual selection, the evolution of cooperation and conflict, and the concepts of fitness. These are not presented as tentative speculations, but as robust theoretical frameworks backed by decades of research that explain real-world observations. Finally, so this is still evolutionary biology. Like, this isn't even this is the stuff that's most grounded. Finally, the book firmly establishes the brain as an evolutionary product, subject to the same principles that govern all other biological traits. It posits that distinctly human characteristics, such as our enormous brain and capacity for language, were likely selected due to a combination of ecological challenges and the complexities of social interactions. Twitch, some weirdos, that's what I think. Haha. Twitch started embracing the corpo slop corporate philosophy after COVID hard. Yeah, I guess I haven't really been paying too much attention. But it does seem like a lot of people are pretty upset with Twitch pretty frequently. We were talking about this one yesterday, the blind watchmaker. We talk about this specifically for the point that evolution doesn't have like a direction, like a premeditated direction. And then, Dawkins' work also serves as an important lesson in the responsible interpretation of scientific theory. While he passionately argues for the power of evolution as an explanatory framework, his method is rooted in the demand for empirical rigor and testable hypotheses for any specific claim about an evolutionary adaptation. The boundary, a scientific theory describes what is, not what ought to be. So, yeah. Provides a descriptive account of a natural process, not a moral or ethical blueprint. So that's our combat against people who take evolution and make wild implications from it. All right, the brain's evolved structure. We talk about the deep history of ourselves, the 4 billion year story of how we got conscious brains. Joseph Ledoux traces the 4 billion year history of life to explain the origins of the human brain. He argues that to understand ourselves, we must first understand the deep history of survival, as the nervous system evolved primarily to make ancient survival behaviors, like detecting danger and finding food, more efficient. His detailed account of how newer neural systems became integrated with ancient survival circuits supports our model of the brain as a cumulative and interconnected system. His work affirms that we can conceptually distinguish between brain functions based on their evolutionary history, from basic life-sustaining processes to higher-order cognition, while understanding that these systems are now part of a single unified framework network. A crucial distinction, though, that Ledoux makes is his higher-order theory of emotion, which posits that the subjective feeling of an emotion is a cognitive construction dependent on our advanced cortex. So this is actually even farther away from panpsychism than what I was trying to say, because I don't actually align with this view, but. The higher order theory of emotion, which posits that the subjective feeling of an emotion is a cognitive construction dependent on our advanced cortex. So this would suggest that like a chicken actually doesn't experience significant pain because it cannot actually leverage a neocortex to make sense of it. This view is a key part of an ongoing scientific debate. The modern emerging consensus, and the view this document adopts, is that both perspectives are essential. Evidence suggests that ancient subcortical circuits are fundamental for generating raw primary affective states, while cortical networks are necessary for the conscious awareness, interpretation, and regulation of these states. So, I see no evidence not sufficient evidence for a strictly higher order theory of emotion. Which the ironic thing is, like, Morally speaking, I hope that this is the case, because then all those chickens wouldn't be suffering. But I do think those chickens are suffering, unfortunately. Okay. I hate pop, Evo Psych. Yep. Matter of fact, just remove evolution from the curriculum till college. Oh. Well, just remove it from, I don't know. I think it is important for like younger people to learn about evolution, but it's tough because like in order to teach evolution as directly and brutally as it actually is, you have to point out that, just like as I think Jordan Peterson was saying this yesterday, like it involves a lot of death. Like it is a real rarity that you survive in the world. And it's kind of insane that each of us are the product of a string of ancestors that all survived while there were so many deaths. And the like evolution can only occur because of those deaths. In theory, unless like the environment was such that every single random mutation led to survival, but that wasn't the case. So there was something that was pushing the trajectory of adaptations and mutations actually becoming significant products, and that had to be survival while there were many deaths, which is crazy. The yellow screen at 10 a.m. is doing something funny to my brain. Haha. Yeah, unfortunately, it's not getting you as much blue light. So open the blinds and make sure you get that sweet sunlight. People deadass think natural selection is still a thing while living in civilization. That said, I think that when looking into this evidence, I think there was actually still strong claims and maybe even empirical research that showed that evolution is still occurring right now. It's just that, obviously in order to see significant changes that we usually connect with adaptations, it takes a lot longer than like a couple hundred years. What's crazy to me is that probably most of us here had ancestors who survived the Black Death in Europe. That probably most of us. I don't know too much about the Black Death in Europe, but conceptually speaking, I think I get what you're saying. But yeah, evolution takes a long time, a lot of deaths, and once again, our discussion about how not everything is adaptations. There's byproducts and all kinds of things that are just kind of getting, or just remaining in the mix, in the genetic mix. Not even that, but all the wars. I think some people say 50% of Europe succumbed to the Black Death. Wow, that is crazy. Yeah, that is a huge amount. But you do have to consider, I guess, for like that type of stat, like how many of those people already had children, so that even though they died, it's not like they, got eliminated from the pool, if that's how we're going to talk about that. All right, then communication within the brain. This is like straight up brain at the biological level, like at the neuron level. We've got a neuroscience textbook. The textbook edited by Dale Purvis and a team of leading researchers is a foundational text for understanding the biological principles of the nervous system. The book provides a comprehensive and authoritative overview of the brain's fundamental machinery from the molecular and cellular level up to the organization of large-scale sensory and motor systems. Its primary strength lies in its clear step-by-step explanation of the core mechanics of neural communication. This book serves as a primary reference for the bottom-up principles described in this subsection. It offers a detailed account of how individual neurons generate electrical signals, action potentials, how these signals are transmitted from one cell to another across synapses, and the crucial role of neurotransmitters in this process. By meticulously detailing the biophysical and chemical basis of neural signaling, this text provides the essential scientific grounding for understanding how information is processed and communicated within the brain's intricate networks. Okay, I could probably just call it there. Then the next one, we've got cognitive neuroscience, which even though there's a little bit of overlap with these two textbooks or these two books, this one really just covers the cognitive, like functional aspects of the brain. As a foundational text in its field, cognitive neuroscience, the biology of the mind, explores one of the most fundamental questions in science: how the physical brain gives rise to the mind. The work of this author and his colleagues provides a comprehensive overview of the systems and principles that govern cognition. It systematically examines how neural processes form the basis for complex functions such as perception, attention, memory, and consciousness, making it the standard text for understanding the biological underpinnings of mental life. This book is the primary reference for the large-scale functional networks at the heart of this subsection. It provides the essential framework for understanding distributed brain regions, distributed brain regions coordinate their activity to form systems like the default mode network, salience network, executives control network. Furthermore, it details the specific roles of key functional hubs such as the prefrontal cortex and the ACC within these networks. It is the authoritative source. I feel like this thing is just using this authoritative. It explains how the brain's coordinated activity produces a cohesive and meaningful experience of the world. Nice. Okay. 30% to 50% is still huge. That is huge, for sure. Imagine if COVID had that effect or something akin. Yeah. It would be quite wild. It would be like the Avengers, right? We'd all just be like sitting here like, man, we are the ones. All right, and then embodied cognition. This one's weird because, like, looking into this, embodied cognition is kind of like it's kind of like an idea, like a central idea that, you know, has many different perspectives and like sub, theories on top of it. And so even though we kind of leverage a pretty like down the middle version of it, like we have to be mindful that there are these other more extreme versions. So this encyclopedia entry provides a comprehensive academic overview of the embodied cognition research program. It positions the field as a challenge to traditional computational cognitive science inspired by ecological psychology, connectionism, and phenomenology. The article then organizes the sprawling field around several core themes, clarifying the nuances and ongoing philosophical debates surrounding each one. So, of importance, our framework aligns with the principles of embodied cognition as a whole, but adopts a specific scientifically grounded stance within these debates. The encyclopedia entry describes a spectrum of views, from conservative models to radical ones that seek to replace all internal representation. Our document situates itself firmly in a brain-centric or conservative camp, one that is highly compatible with the predictive processing paradigm. While we fully endorse the core embodied thesis that cognition is grounded in the body's sensory, motor, and affective systems, we stop short of the more radical replacement or constitution themes. We treat the brain and body as a tightly integrated predictive system that actively engages with the world to refine its internal models. This approach maintains the organism as the locus of cognition rather than extending cognition fully into the environment. So, like, there are theories that say that the environment is literally part of our cognitive processing, which, you know, once again, fair enough. This is kind of like a semantic issue, but I wouldn't say that that framing would be more precise than one where, you know, it's really happening in our brain, and then our brain is actually extending to our body and whatnot. I mean, obviously, you know, it's very important what our environment is, and context is really important. But you could just simulate the environment through through activating certain sensory brain connections. So, you know, it's really the brain that's the closest to home in terms of what's actually facilitating your cognitive faculties. All right, so that's where we're at. And so I still need to add something for predictive processing. Making sense of experience is pretty much done in the sense that there's nothing new being offered here. It's just kind of connecting what we get, what we talk about with like what we've talked about previously. The more philosophical stuff, the more phenomenological stuff. Predictive processing is certainly going to need a reference. Embodied cognition probably deserves another reference, and maybe even multiple, because we do talk about a lot of stuff in the in the embodied cognition section. We like bring up a lot of specific studies and whatnot. So I got to find where these studies were mentioned, or leverage some type of larger handbook that covers all these things. And I should probably read these more thoroughly too, just so that I'm really in tune with what I'm trying to get at here. So I think that's going to be the plan. A lot to research, a lot to read, and that's not even including part 2 stuff. So I really just need more time. I need more time in the day. Need to lose my job. All right. I think I'm going to call it here. Thanks, y'all, for stopping in and chatting. Having a blast. Hope you guys are as well. For anyone else that's watching, also have a good rest of the night. See y'all later.